My name is Jeremy Jarrell, and welcome to Looking Beyond the Current Sprint, part of the Becoming a Great Scrum Master course of the Scrum Master Fundamentals course series. A few days into the sprint, Alan takes Louise aside after the daily scrum. The team is progressing well towards the sprint goal, but I'd like for you to ensure that there's a plan beyond the current sprint. Isn't the next sprint Dave's responsibility? Louise asks. I was under the impression that the Scrum Master focused on the current sprint, while the product owner focused on the upcoming sprints. Alan replies, Your understanding is correct. Broadly speaking, Scrum Masters are responsible for the success of the current sprint, while the product owner is responsible for planning the work for future sprints, and for ensuring the team is progressing towards a long-term plan that makes sense. But, since as the Scrum Master, you're responsible for ensuring that the team is properly adhering to the Scrum framework, you're also accountable for ensuring that that long-term planning is actually occurring. To do this, I'd like for you to schedule a backlog refinement session including Dave and the development team. Backlog refinement is an opportunity for the entire Scrum team to collaborate on the work that they will be tackling in the next sprint, so the development team can be as efficient as possible when they begin that work. The Scrum framework recommends that the development team should be prepared to invest about 10% of their total time into refining the upcoming product backlog within a sprint, which in a 2-week sprint equates to about 6 to 8 hours per individual. But, adds Alan, I often find that number to be a little high, especially after a project has been underway for some time and the backlog has started to become more understood. Let's start with 1 hour per week, which will give us 2 hours in a 2-week sprint. Since your team is beginning your sprints on Wednesdays, Fridays may be a good day for this session since it falls relatively evenly throughout the sprint, and refinement sessions can be pretty relaxed, making them a nice Friday afternoon activity for the team. Because of the more relaxed nature of backlog refinement sessions, they're also not subject to the same concerns as other sprint ceremonies regarding whether or not they can be held on a Friday. It's less of an issue if a team member is out of the office on backlog refinement day, unless of course it's the product owner, and the meeting can be easily rescheduled for another day of the week if the entire office has to be closed. With backlog refinement sessions, it's not as critical that they occur on a certain day of the sprint, as long as enough time is left to incorporate any feedback into the backlog before the next sprint planning session. The following Friday, the team gathers in the team room for their backlog refinement session. Alan steps to the front to address the team. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll work with Dave to plan the items that he's considering for the next sprint. Josh raises his hand. We have a lot of work that we're responsible for in this sprint. I don't understand why we need to spend time working on the next sprint. Isn't the next sprint Dave's responsibility? As the product owner, Alan answers, Dave is responsible for the creation and ordering of the product backlog. But as a collaborative Scrum team, you must all work together to ensure that the items that will be loaded into the next sprint are refined enough that your next sprint planning session is effective. When a Scrum team does not invest sufficient time in backlog refinement, they usually find that the sprint planning sessions become very long and frustrating experiences. The items selected for the sprint planning sessions tend to be vaguely defined, leading to extensive debate and discussion before an estimate can be given, and often more questions are raised during sprint planning than are answered. And since sprint planning is a time box session, the team is often unable to plan enough work for the next sprint within the time box if the backlog is not properly refined. This means that the team must hold ad hoc planning sessions within the sprint to keep the sprint backlog full of enough work to stay busy, which interrupts the rhythm of the development team and is frustrating for the entire Scrum team. But regularly performing backlog refinement has 2 other advantages. First, giving the development team insight into any upcoming work can be helpful since it may influence any of the current work in progress. This can reduce rework since you can bear the specific future direction of the project in mind when making any technical decisions. And secondly, as I've mentioned before, Dave may place rough estimates on product backlog items in order to better facilitate his long-term planning. These estimates are based only on the relative size of items that the team has estimated prior and are not commitments. The development team always places the final estimate on any item during sprint planning. But it's not unusual for some of these estimates to be wildly different than the actual estimate that the development team assigns to the same item. This meeting is an opportunity for Dave to share some of these estimates to check their validity with the development team. If he finds that they're significantly off, having this session within the sprint gives him a few days to consider any trade-offs that he may make in the backlog item's details to better bring it in line with the original rough estimate, or to remove other selected items for the next sprint so the larger item can fit. After Alan's explanation, both Dave and Louise step to the front of the room. Louise begins. Unlike the other Scrum ceremonies, the Scrum framework doesn't prescribe how or when backlog refinement must be done. It only specifies that the practice should occur and gives a guideline that it should take no more than 10% of the development team's time within the sprint. This is because backlog refinement is more of a general practice than a specific ceremonies. What this means to us, though, is that we have a lot of flexibility in how to define the format for our backlog refinement sessions that will work the best for our team. Dave then adds, Louise and I have discussed this with Alan, and we all agree that the first half of the sprint planning session, in which the product owner initially introduces the sprint objective, as well as the product backlog item selected to support that objective, is a great model for our backlog refinement sessions. I'll begin by explaining my proposed objective for the next sprint, and will then explain each backlog item that I've selected to support that objective, as well as the rough estimate that I've added to it based on other estimates that I've seen the team assign to what looks like similar work, at least to me. As I describe each item, I'd like for you to consider a few questions. First, as we describe each item, please consider any reasons why you wouldn't be able to select that item for the next sprint. Are there technical prerequisites to that item that we haven't tackled yet? Or are there questions about the goal of this item that we still need to answer? Bringing these questions up now will give me the rest of this sprint to find the answers before the next sprint begins. I'd rather have this discussion now instead of on the day of sprint planning. And second, does my rough estimate for this item seem reasonable? I'm sure that it won't be as accurate as the estimate that the development team will arrive at using Planning Poker, but am I in the ballpark, so to speak? This is important feedback since it will tell me if I've planned too much work for the next sprint and need to adjust my plans accordingly, and it will help me better understand the effort that's required for each type of item so I can make better investments in our project in the future.